Right.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the July 21st, 2023 meeting of the VRE Operations Board. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Bagley?
Here.
Ms. Bailey?
Here.
Ms. Bonke?
Here.
Ms. Franklin? Ms. Gary? Here. Ms. Hayes? Here. Mr. Carantona?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Here.
Ms. Benson? Here. Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Stork?
Here.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Here.
And Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carantonis and Councilperson Bagley have requested to participate in the meeting remotely. Mr. Carantonis is participating from Arlington, Virginia, due to a medical reason, and Ms. Bagley is participating from Alexandria due to having just returned from travel. Being a quorum physically present, do I have a motion and a second to allow Mr. Carantonis and Ms. Bagley to participate electronically?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Rich, you want to give us a safety moment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have assignments made in the event that we do need to get first responders and or just some attention to folks in the room. I just want to make also a quick reminder, obviously this time of year, not unlike other times of the year, but more importantly this time of year, just the importance of staying hydrated. Water is good, but there are sports drinks and stuff out there that do add a dose of electrolytes and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. I think maybe we haven't quite peaked in terms of index type stuff, but it's just a good reminder for us all to just stay hydrated and watch out for the little ones as well. They need our help too to remain hydrated. So that's my safety.
Okay, thank you. Next item is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the agenda, which is slightly amended from that which was?
So moving, Mr. Chair. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. The agenda is approved. Before we move on to approval of the minutes, I'll just note, you probably recall that at last month's meeting, we didn't have, because of a number of abstentions, we didn't have enough affirmative votes to pass the motion to approve the May minutes. So we're going to take them up again. And I've been asked to remind members, you don't have to abstain. I know it's common, but if you miss the meeting, you don't actually have to abstain from approval of the minutes. In theory, you could have watched the video of the meeting and determined that the minutes were accurate. So that's up to you, but you don't actually have to abstain. That said, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from the June 16th, 2023 Operations Board meeting and the minutes from the May 19th Operations Board meeting. Before we ask for a motion, are there any corrections or amendments to either set of minutes? Nope. Okay. Is there a motion to approve both the May 19th and the June 16th meeting minutes?
Move.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? On favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? The motion carries and the minutes are approved. Welcome everyone to our July meeting. Just as a reminder, there's a legislative committee meeting immediately following the operations board meeting, and we will meet right here. So everyone is welcome to participate. We do have a bit of a challenge as Miss Crystal and Miss Bailey were the only two members of the legislative committee meeting. Miss Crystal, of course, no longer a member of our board. We need at least one member representing NVTC, which will be me, I guess. But we're very welcoming of anyone else who'd like to sit in on or join the legislative committee. It's not typically a heavy lift, but it'd be great to have other folks involved and engaged. I want to thank all the members of the board and the staff, especially for our June retreat. I think it was a really successful day. The System Plan 2050 team got, I think, the feedback and direction that they needed on our priorities and our interest based on the robust conversation we had. Information and responses to questions that you all had as a board will come back to us in our September or October meeting. So if you ask for additional analysis or information, the System Plan 2050 team will be working on that and bring that back to us in the fall, as well as the more detailed information on the long-term service concepts that we asked them to explore, and the next steps to complete the system plan update. So we'll continue our work on that in the fall. Also want to congratulate the entire VRE team and thank the executive committee and board members Bailey, Hayes, and McLaughlin, and board member Hayes for hosting us for the open house of the new Lou facility, life cycle overhaul and upgrade facility. We got to see some really cool demonstrations of the capabilities there, and was just really an exciting day and great accomplishment for the entire VRE team. So congratulations to everybody. Mr.
I think Ms. Bunky was there, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
Executive committee, she's included in.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah. But it really was fun and great to celebrate with everyone who made it happen. With that, I'll turn it over to Rich for the CEO's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of topics, or a handful of topics to go through, run through them. If you have any questions, definitely answer them. From an on-time performance standpoint for the month of June, as you know, previous months we had been tracking system-wide in the 85% range. We ticked up for the month of June system-wide, and just note in comparison where system performance is typically a challenge relative to our target of 90% in the summer months. We were also slightly ahead of our 2022 calendar year numbers. So I'll just say not satisfied yet. We're still striving to get that system-wide on-time performance up, but it's headed in the right direction, at least for the month of June. And of course, this table here shows a little bit of a breakdown. Once again, point to the number of trains that were 30 minutes or late. If you're going to have some delays, and some delays sometimes are necessary, we like to keep the total delay minutes as small as possible. So that's just an indication that we didn't have any excessive delays. And then, of course, this is the breakdown by major categories. Still congestion, primarily coming out of Washington Union Terminal in the PM is still a challenge for us. I do want to just at this point note that, and I know I was communicating with you last week, the email about an incident at Washington Union Terminal. It affected our service, and I tried to explain it in my email. Is that when the incident occurred, we'd already had about 8 of our concests into the terminal. 5 of those concests had not yet made it into the terminal, so we ended up.
Sorry, you just got to tell us. I know it only because I asked you yesterday, but tell us what concepts.
It's the number of actual trains, right? It's the train set, locomotive, and the associated associated passenger cars. So just To expand that a second, so we operate 32 trains a day, and there's 13 contests a day that make those 32 trains happen. So I'll just give you that. Maybe I didn't give that to you yesterday.
No, that's new. Okay.
Bonus information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But nonetheless, it created a challenge, and I will say, not just for VRE. This really created a challenge for Amtrak, and more specifically for Amtrak, for Amtrak Virginia passengers as well. And of course, this interrupted the network all up and down the East Coast. So that obviously affected on-time performance, affected ridership and stuff. There was the recovery, I will have to say, was given the incident, the recovery by Amtrak was good. We're still under a slow order in the tunnel right now, still going at relatively lower speed so they can continue to monitor the repairs and stuff. But I also want to give a shout out to CSX and Norfolk Southern, because we had to get really creative. As I mentioned, we had 5 contests that we could use. And so we wanted to try to operate a limited service for Wednesday and then leading into Thursday of last week. So both those host railroads and Amtrak, of course, worked well with us to just give our passengers somewhat of an alternative versus just completely shutting down the VRE service. I also want to thank OmniRide. OmniRide did assist us, as they do, by just simply honoring VRE ticketed passengers on their bus service and stuff like that. We have similar arrangements with like Fairfax Connector and those guys as well. So it's like everybody really stepped up. Unfortunate situation, unfortunate, but the recovery was well done. We did come back to full service on Friday of last week. And then, of course, we had some weather-related issues on the Manassas line Friday evening. All of that to say, the week, this past week has actually been, I don't want to, it's been okay. It's been good. I don't want to, we still have a PM service to operate, but definitely from a recovery standpoint, we're in pretty good shape. So I did want to mention that before I get off of performance there. So if anybody has any questions about any of those incidents there, I'd like to answer those, but
Sure.
So I was up in Union Station, came through it a couple times on Monday, and I was with some Amtrak executives, and DJ Saylor, our executive director, and myself did lend our concern to Amtrak that this is something that needs to be fixed. This is twice in the last 2 months. There's been a tunnel issue where they pointed out what happened is right at a junction point. If you pick the worst place that this would happen, that's what happened in the tunnel. So they're taking it seriously. However, we are dealing with a tunnel that's well over 100 years old.
Wow.
1908, yeah. So not only short term are they going to try to do some things, but I think longer term there's going to be some studies with regard to Union Station capacity that we're going to talk about with Rich and others. So we're working on it. There's no quick fixes for a 1908 for an older tunnel, but it's something that's very important to the Commonwealth. This is a conduit to DC and the Northeast Corridor.
Sure. In a minute or less, is the essence of how it got derailed? Is it just, do we have any sense of what created that or caused that?
it's still being investigated. Let me just say that. And I don't want to be coy or anything with that. When you have an incident like that, particularly when it has the amount of impact immediately to the infrastructure, generally what they'll do and is basically they'll remove all the components of the affected area, get it over off to the side, rebuild it, and then come back and it's about service recovery, right? So get the service recovered and then take, more of a manageable time to actually do any kind of finite analysis on, switch points, frogs, the different components that make up these interlocks. So that's seemingly what would take the time, but those are the answers that we all need exactly. What was the root cause of the failure? So it just takes a little bit of time.
An estimated time when the report would be, at least the draft report would be.
Sometimes it's weeks to months, right? So sometimes they send out like when it's, if it's, anything relative to metallurgy or anything like that, they like to send things off the labs. They like to get very, very specific information. So, as soon as I know something, I will gladly share it with everybody.
It's more curiosity from me.
Well, but I have to tell you, since I've been here, Mike mentioned the couple of incidences. Those are the only two incidences that have caused these types of service disruptions in, almost 15 years that I've been here. It doesn't happen very often, but, anyway.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Monthly ridership, total, a couple of, compared to May, obviously 2 fewer, service days, but slightly higher than May. So average daily ridership, of course, reflects that a little bit, just picked up, a few riders there. And you'll see later, I think, in a presentation that shows this, a little bit of this graph, where just historically ridership just seems to just kind of plateau a little bit in the summer, pick up in the fall, drop off, at the Christmas holiday season, pick back up. So we're in that right now. So, I did want to mention this. I know there was some press about, a report that the Greater Washington folks had put out, and the headline was, in addition to other transportation providers in the region, that the VRE led the nation in recovery of ridership first quarter 2022 compared to first quarter 2023. I just want to emphasize that that's a percentage change, and we all know that we saw, a large increase over the last year from a percentage change. So, my takeaway from this is basically, the region as a whole, ridership has been, for transportation, or transit has been, picking up over the last year, and VRE has, benefited from that. So anyway, I know I had a couple of conversations with some folks, but I just wanted to highlight that. Back to the Lou Open House. Yes, very good event. I did want to update, I know at the event, the facility still is not quite open for full business. We mentioned by the end of this month, the end of July, that we should be in there, at least starting to transition some of our processes and stuff, and some of our operations into there. And we're on pace for that. But again, in addition to the chair's comments, really appreciate the operations board attendance. And of course, as you could see at the bottom left picture there, or kind of make out that, we had a lot of our partners there as well. Keolis Rail Services, Virginia, CSX was there. We even had a gentleman from the Federal Railroad Administration came down there. And I will also say, it did take a few days to get the barbecue stains out of the floor there. But I think the food was pretty good as well. So, but again, thanks everybody for coming. Also wanted to highlight that last week we did there was a groundbreaking for the Manassas Park Parking Garage project. I want to just emphasize that that's the project, that's the VRE project for the community over there, and appreciate Chair Walkinshaw for his remarks. And of course, Council Member Mensing was there, and just wanted to highlight, and it was highlighted throughout this event, that it's been a lot of collaboration and a lot of different partners to get to this point. And I think we tallied it up. It's been about 8 years or so. And I just made a commitment that it wouldn't take us 8 years to construct the facility. So we're gonna try to hold to that. So just want to mention that. And then want to highlight in front of you, you do have a placemat in front of you, just to highlight some of the, I'll just say well, all of the points in the survey are important, but just wanted to highlight some of the more salient points from the survey. As you know, we do an annual customer service survey. This was conducted in May. We've tallied up all the results. And again, in your placemat, this is meant for you to just take with you. And albeit, as point out on this slide, you know, overall crew performance, service quality, those types of things, still up in that range. We do have some opportunities for improvement. But with that, we don't just shift over and focus on opportunities improvement. We have to also look at some of these other categories where we score high in to make sure that we don't let those slip as well. So, with that, when you have a chance, we will be posting the full survey results online on our website. And like I said, we are putting together, as we do annually, the plan to, you know, for those opportunities for improvement and other things. So, yes, sir.
Quick clarification question. There's a factoid in the right. 68% of riders are government employees. Just to be clear, that is during the time period the survey was taken.
Yes, on that.
We believe that number was higher before the pandemic because the federal government employees have not come back to work. Or is that still relatively consistent with pre-pandemic?
Yeah, it's relatively consistent with pre-pandemic.
Okay, thank you.
It bounces, you know, could be anywhere from 65 to 70, I think, over the years.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, federal employees haven't come back to work, but private sector employees haven't either, right? So it's been relatively even. We focus more on federal because it's just, you can focus on it, but it's both.
And then lastly, Mr. Chair, I do have, I would like to introduce some new staff members and promised I wouldn't try to embarrass them or anything like that. But,
They're each gonna give us a 10-minute speech, right?
that's what we told them. I hope they're prepared. But first, I'd like, in fact, all four of you, why don't you just stand up there in the back? They're all being shy and everything. And just raise your hand. Naomi, raise your hand. Naomi, just recently graduated from Westchester University with a bachelor's in accounting, and she's providing us some part-time temporary support to our finance and accounting team during this upcoming audit. So she's here to help us out part-time. Alper is here as an intern. He's currently working towards a mechanical engineering degree at Virginia Tech. Erica is just joined our staff as a full-time employee, as a communication specialist in our rail operations group, working for Chris. She does have extensive customer service and operations experience. She comes from the airline industry, some hospitality, food service, and some other things. So, and if you recall, for those that were at the open house at the Lou, I did have Brenda Thompson stand up, who was just about to retire. So effectively, Erica's come in and is backfilling that position. So we are too happy to have Erica. And then Natalia, she's a senior this fall at the University of Maryland. She's joined us as an intern, and she's majoring in English language and literature with a minor in creative writing. So she's actually interned with Chet, who's all shy back in the corner, helping Chet out with this very expansive marketing plan that he has, and so we're excited to have her on board as well. So just want to welcome you all, and thanks for helping us out. That's the end of my report. Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
questions for Rich, Ms. Bailey?
No question. I just wanted to give a comment, Rich. Thank you for that, that section in your report, that you had the comparison of where we were with the other areas. that you work with, just to let my colleagues know that is a tool that we use when we do evaluations. And so it's a great tool. So I want to thank you for having that in your report, because evaluation season is upon us. So I appreciate that.
Anything else?
Chair
Mr.
Walkinshaw?
Chair,
Yes, Ms. Bagley?
If I could ask you a quick question about any data we saw from the Fridays in June, the Fare-Free Fridays, if we saw any bump in ridership on those, I guess, 4 Fridays?
Do you have any data on the Fare-Free Fridays that started in June? Was there an increase
Sure.
relative to previous Fridays? where
Sure.
people take
So
trips?
for the first Friday, it started the first Friday in June. For the first 6 Fridays, and if we just compare to Friday slightly before the campaign started, the average daily ridership was up about 40%. So we went from about a 3,500 average daily riders to up over 5,000. And then there's some other ways to break that out. I will add as well is that it's really, once again, become a really good tool for us to work specifically with new riders. Some folks that want to try VRE, who actually are working remotely in some cases and have been driving. They've actually used the Fare-Free Friday to kind of figure out their trip and all that type of stuff. And then subsequently have moved over, instead of driving, to riding VRE as their commute. Again, handful of people, maybe a dozen or so, but it's at a small scale, maintenance and then of course, we have folks that are retired and they plan their whole summer, Washington area, museum trips and stuff every Friday, and they catch VRE to go into the museums and do some of that stuff. So there's a range of reasons why folks are utilizing the service on Friday, and subsequently the reason why their ridership is increasing. So it is meeting some of those objectives. We will come back obviously in the fall with a lot more, data analysis on that initiative. So.
Ms. Bumpkin?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have to thank the staff for the overhaul and the upgrade of this facility. The only thing I want to say to the board, for those of you that weren't there, this is really the best visual on here. And there's a little tiny building back here where they used to service, how many trains fit in there, Rick?
In that building, there are essentially only one
One concept.
car.
One car, and it is amazing how they maintain these trains over the years in elements and what they did. And the facility inside is phenomenal of what its capabilities are, but you can read about that. But I just want to say kudos to your staff for all the work that they did in the elements all those years, maintaining those trains, because I don't think the only people that really know about that is your staff and those people that were the maintenance workers that worked on it. And that was a huge lift, all 30 years, right? So anyway, kudos, and it was a job well done. I was very glad I was able to go there and be a part of that.
Mr. Chair, I have
Yes, Mr. Karantonis.
just a brief question. First of all, thank you for the presentation. This was very, very insightful and helpful. One question I had on the survey. So the information at the platform, this kind of slipped a little bit. What is the reason for that? Why is that happening? Is that an electronic thing? Is that a personnel issue, or does it have to do with other, causes?
Let me back up here just a little bit. Specifically,
Timeliness of platform info.
platform information.
Yeah.
I can say maybe, Chris, if you want to add anything here. It's so we have been working to enhance our platform communication, as you know.
Yeah, yeah.
We were in here a couple of months ago. There was a presentation on enhancing our visual monitoring systems and enhancing, that level of communication at the platforms. There wasn't anything materially that changed. We're still operating, but we're still operating the same system we have out there, but we recognize it does need to be enhanced, and that's why we're in here sharing with you our plans moving forward. I'm not aware of any, like major outages or anything like that. Again, this is one of those items that opportunity for improvement. And what we'll do is, now that we've received the feedback, we'll do a little deeper dive in that and see if we can't find some elements, whether it's technology, whether it's, just equipment related or anything like that. We'll dive into that and see what that actually is.
It might be that the decline in people's satisfaction with on-time performance is connected to the timeliness of platform info, because if trains are late more, you're just going to be more frustrated and you need more information. So the two might be connected.
Yeah. I can tell you, like, and what motivates my question is that as an Amtrak rider, this is kind of, to me, a mystery. The way the information is provided and changes last second on the monitors, etc., and you never really can rely on that. I mean, it's not true. You can rely on that, but more than often, it happens that things happen on the information that you are getting on at the platform or right at the station that are quite frustrating. So anyway, thank you for this insight. I will keep an eye on that. And Mr. Chair, I will be joining the legislative committee. It will be an honor to join. I will stay after the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Stork?
My question is more context. I'm sorry I couldn't attend, but order of magnitude, the planning for this facility started when? Obviously, I love the fact that 97% was paid for by the state and federal government. And then when the board would have approved this, any sense of the order of magnitude when those dates happened X number of years ago? And just, I know this stuff takes a long time, which is kind of why I wanted to make sure that I understood at least that general context.
Sure. A minute or less.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
High level.
Yeah, so let's go back about 10 years ago. One thing, and maybe 11 or so now, but one thing that the board adopted was a life cycle maintenance program. Okay, so it was a more advanced, more more engineered approach to maintaining a rolling stock moving forward. So with that strategy came, we recognized we need the ability to be able to do more in-house, on-site, and have more control over the quality of those operations. So that takes you about a decade or so. So then the planning started, and it's taken about a decade. It's taken about 10 years. We did get into a situation about 5 years ago as we were trying to advance. Part of being able to construct that facility is we need to purchase some adjacent property out there. We got into some issues, actually the developer and their current zoning and stuff like that. So we had to go through a rezoning process. So there's just a lot of things like that preceded what you see now. So it was about a decade from start to finish on getting a facility.
So when the board decided they wanted to move forward with this was about a decade ago?
So yes,
That's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
That's why I went all the way back to 10 years ago about the life cycle maintenance strategy. That was all part of that strategy moving forward.
Yeah, and at the event, I pointed out, I think it's the case that maybe only Mr. Kelly was a board member when the board had the foresight to put that in, not to put you on the spot, Mr. But it is, a testament to the long-term implications of the decisions we're making. The decisions we're making now with respect to System Plan 2050 and TRV, we might not all be around to see it to fruition as board members at least, but this was an example of that. Other questions for Rich before we move on? Okay, next item is public comment. VRE accepts public comments both in person and electronically via the VRE website. Members of the public wishing to make public comments have 3 minutes and should state their full name and the jurisdiction they live in. Written comments submitted before 8 a.m. this morning will be forwarded to the members of the board, read into the minutes, and attached to the official minutes. Do we have any members of the public here who would like to address the board? I don't see any. Madam Clerk, do we have any electronically submitted comments?
Mr. Chair, we have the one electronically submitted comment that was forwarded to all the board members yesterday, and no additional.
Okay, great. Next, moving on to action items. Action item A, Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This action item, we're seeking authorization. Let's see, I'm sorry. We're seeking an authorization to execute a sole source contract for Wabtec Cloud PTC hosting and Wabtec One PTC performance analysis. And that's with Wabtec Corporation, their business unit in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, for the amount stated in the resolution plus a contingency for a 5-year term. Let me just give you a little bit of background on this, and glad to take any other questions. But so as we implemented positive train control, we were required to go out and solicit for a back office service provider. And that's essentially a communications path to our host railroads from our equipment to the host railroad. So Norfolk Southern and CSX. And so we did that solicitation, we awarded a contract, and then subsequently over the years, essentially this market, if you will, is consolidated. So we initiated, or we awarded a contract with Air Inc. or Collins Aerospace, or they changed their name a couple of times. And then we subsequently had a contract through Wabtec doing some of the other pieces of this service. Well, they've consolidated. Wabtec bought out Air Inc., so there's a provider here. So just wanted to point that out, primarily why the request for the sole source. The other piece I wanted to point out is that for the basic services compared over the previous 5 years, the 5 years moving forward, the basic services are about the same. And the cost for that is comparable. There's several major enhancements here, but one of the key enhancements that has been developed over the last 5 years, wasn't available to us before, is this whole performance analytics. We have struggled to, and I very seldom use that word, but we have struggled when we have PTC related issues or incidents, particularly en route failures and stuff. We essentially through various operating rule requirements and stuff like that, we basically get the equipment back to our facilities. We have to go through this very manual process of down in log files and all that type of stuff to identify exactly what was going on. And subsequently, it creates, when we have these incidents, it does create delays, and in some cases, substantial delays. So with this technology and what we will also be getting in this next 5 years is essentially the ability, one element is the ability, so when we have an en route issue with a locomotive or a cab control car, our technicians could actually view real time from a desktop, from wherever they're sitting, what the locomotive engineers see on board that equipment. And essentially be able to, we would like to think that we would be able to, in a lot of cases, resolve the issue en route with minimal delay or even just very transparent to our passengers. So, and there's a lot of other things that will be coming with this new contract as well. So I just want to hit that point. I didn't mean to have an extensive summary there, but this is, when we look back at on-time performance and frankly, just a up in passenger satisfaction and stuff like this. This'll help us out in that regard as well. So that's my summary, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions on the item? Ms. Bailey?
I may have missed this one. Is this a new system, Rich, or what? It's not a new system, is it?
It's not a new system. The back office system is not new. The last part I just talked about,
Yeah.
those are relatively new enhancements to an already
Okay.
existing platform.
Okay. Enhancement word was what I was. Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there a motion to approve action item A?
Mr. Chair. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Action item B, Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This action item 9B, we're seeking authorization to execute a contract for security camera installation. And this contract is with Genesis Impact LLC of Washington, D.C. Again, for the amount stated in the resolution plus a contingency. As a quick summary, we have security cameras at most of our stations, not all of our stations, but most of them. And we've done those in very small chunks, if you will, station at a time, a couple of stations at a time. And previously, the operations board authorized a purchase of a system that included essentially an upgrade to a more modern system and the ability to go back and upgrade cameras. Not to get too wonky, but we do have some cameras out there that are still analog cameras and not digital cameras. So they work, they serve their purpose, but they're definitely at the end of their useful lives. So by awarding this contract, we'll be able to get out there at our stations and upgrade the system and have a common platform across all our station platforms. I'm going to also point out, because this is key as well, we do have as a recipient of federal money, we do have this 1% set aside that we do have to spend the federal formula or federal money on safety and security components. So this does help us meet that requirement as well. So that's my summary, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions on the items, Bobke?
I just had a question. If I remember correctly, reading this, there's a match that's required. And so the 20% match, which would be roughly 100,000, is that above the amount there? So those bids came in at that level, and then is our 20% match the 100,000, or how does the match work in the bids?
So let's just take it this way. So Genesis is 494, 768. So 80% of that will be the federal formula money. And then 16% of that is a state match. And then the 4% of that would be the local.
Okay,
match.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's not above that number. It's
Yeah,
within
it
that
wasn't
number.
really clear. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Is there a motion and a
So
second?
moved.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. We'll move on to our information items and the main event for today, discussion of key issues for the FY 2025 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to say, while Mark transitions up to the podium, but it looks like he's already done that. Just validate Mark to your left hand. You should have a clicker. So what you're going to see here is essentially their information item. This is a presentation that accompanies that information item. And what you'll find is there is a little bit of follow-up from the retreat last month, but as we do this time each year, we want to present some things to you. We want to have some discussion, get your feedback as we prepare to bring you a preliminary budget in September. So without further ado, Mr. Schofield, it's all yours. Thank you, Rich, and good morning, board members. I'm actually only going to stand here for a minute. We're going to mix it up a little bit this year. Many of you probably know Alex Buchanan. He has been with VRE for over 20 years. He has probably more institutional knowledge about VRE in his head than almost anyone. Alex has now taken on a role as the operating budget manager for VRE. So he and I are going to sort of tag team this budget presentation today. We've reorganized the key issues a little bit in the presentation versus the board item, just so that we're not like popping back and forth between the two of us. Our goal here today really is to provide you a chance to give us guidance, but also to give you a lot of historical context. You'll see almost all the issues. That, you know, whether it's the subsidy, whether it's the fares, whether it's inflation, whatever, we've given historical data going back usually to even before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now that we've kind of left the pandemic. And again, to try to give you an idea, maybe we'll be returning to sort of where we were before the pandemic. Maybe we're in a new world. What maybe didn't we do during the pandemic that now we need to sort of evaluate where we are? Again, hoping to sort of ground all of you in these different issues and give us all sort of a consistent baseline to then have the discussion about where we go for 2025. So with that, for the first half of the presentation, I will hand it over to Alex.
Good morning. John, are we ready? Yep. All right, so just to give you an overview of where we are, I know it's already been mentioned a bit by Rich. This is our key issues. This is the kickoff really for the budget cycle leading between now and spring of next year. Typically, we bring you all the issues that we staff have identified as being truly the material issues as we go into the budget cycle. The top tier, really important things that we either need to solicit board information or board opinion on, or just that we have identified as economic issues or financial issues that are involved that we are monitoring and want to focus on going into the next budget cycle. We will bring you a preliminary budget in September. That's typically sort of the height of the budget where we go over what everyone has asked for in terms of departmental costs. And we have our very early estimates on a lot of our contract increases, things like that. We then work through October, November to winnow down those numbers to get the actual contract increase percentages. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then in December, we bring you the proposed budget. So, and that's when you guys would vote on that. And you would refer that to the commissions. Ultimately, the commissions would vote on the VRE budget in January. And then ultimately, the jurisdictions would allocate funding for VRE in the spring, as you guys know from your own budget processes. So the first key issue I want to talk about is service levels. We've talked a lot about that last month at the meeting. Currently, we run the 32 daily trains, 8 in and 8 out on each line. And one of the things that we've been tasked with is looking to see where we can adjust service, add service to try to drive ridership. So that's really one of the things that we'll be doing quite a bit here in the lead up to preliminary. Things that we've discussed, obviously weekend service, and whether that would be a one-day type of weekend service or both days. Again, very preliminarily right now. Also additional weekday service, whether that service should be focused on the commuter peak, as it sort of has always historically been for VRE. And then are there any schedule enhancements we can make within the schedule of the trains that we already have to again, better serve the ridership as we sort of evaluate as ridership changes. Again, the most bang for a buck. I mean, we're really looking to do the most we can do for the least cost, obviously. You know, we want to be able to drive ridership as much as possible, but keep our operating budget certainly as low as possible. Obviously, the fiscal constraints of VRE are well known to all of us. You know, so we're looking, Rich is looking, Mark and I, at where we can get the most results. So passenger fares. This is the sort of long history on passenger fares. For a long time, VRE had a policy, sort of unofficial, at the board level that we would increase fares one year and increase the jurisdictional subsidy the next year. And that worked for quite a long time. Obviously, with the pandemic coming, we have not had any fare increases since 2020, fiscal year 2020. And so one of the issues for board consideration today is the concept of a fare increase for fiscal year 25. And again, to reiterate, we're talking fiscal year 25, not the current fiscal year that we're in now, 24. Something to keep in mind, if we do determine that we need to do a fare increase for 25, there are several things we need to do that we don't usually do, which would be things like public hearings and soliciting public feedback. That's just a typical part of it. Since we haven't done it in so long, I want to make sure the board members, are aware of that. And really, I mean, this is sort of an important issue to consider in this decision, is there are potentially conflicting priorities here. We're looking to drive ridership as much as we can, and typically higher costs can sometimes cut into that. But we also obviously live in a constrained world financially, and we want to be able to raise as much revenue, as is possible. And so that all factors into sort of the decision-making on the issue of doing a fare increase. So with that, I'll certainly open the floor for board discussion if anybody has any comments or.
Does it make sense to go through the rest?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think it makes sense to
Get it all and then.
look at it as a whole and this decision impact there, yeah.
Okay, so this is just sort of meant to give you an idea of where the world has gone since our last fare increase. If we had kept with the old school methodology of a 3% increase every other year, this is an example fare because it's nice and round. It's the 1 to 6 single ride. It would have risen over the course of up to 24 by 61 cents. If we had tied it to inflation, and inflation is something we'll talk about here in a little bit, it would be $11.81. So again, this form of revenue has clearly not kept up with the cost of inflation over the course of the last 5 years. So again, something to consider as we walk through this process. Another key issue that we're going to talk about is staffing. VRE has always been sort of a do more with less organization in terms of staff. We're pretty small. We currently have 56 full-time employees, and then we have several part-timers and interns that assist us as well. What we're going to look at this year is obviously with any new or expanded service, what that impact would be on VRE's FTE group. New facilities, obviously the new that we've opened up, but also things like Potomac Shores Station coming. You'd be happy with that one. Expanded parking facilities, and just sort of the overall burden on VRE for things in the lines of safety and security, regulatory compliance, financial responsibility, all the things that we're tasked with doing for the organization. Do we need any additional people to help us carry that burden properly and fully? Obviously, we also look at every year the cost benefit analysis between having an FTE for a particular function or whether it's more efficient or more effective to contract those functions out. So we've given you just a little bit of a chart here just to show sort of the growth of VRE over, again, the last several years, more for information than anything else. So when we come back in the preliminary budget in September, we will very likely have our recommendations, at least preliminary recommendations on any staff increases. So inflation is something I'm sure you're all aware of, both at your own jurisdictions and just generally shopping. It's been an issue lately in the last couple of years. It's important to note our operating costs are driven by the service that we operate. It's not driven by ridership. So whether have 18,000 riders or we have 6,000 riders, the cost to operate that train is effectively the same. As we go through these things and we look at effects of inflation, that raises our costs in many cases quite a bit more. So many of our major contracts are linked to inflation indexes. CPI, for example, is the contractual driver for Keolis, which does train operations and our mechanical side. But also things like access fees. Those are driven by inflationary metrics. Our access to Washington Union Terminal, especially, and the Northeast Corridor, the small piece that we operate on, is driven by a model that also has a material inflationary index component to it. So you can see from the chart, we lived in a very inflation-friendly environment for a very long time. And over the course of the last 2 years, that has sort of ballooned up, and that's definitely affected our costs. In fact, one of the things I think Rich would agree we're very proud of is last year, we were able to basically keep the budget flat, except for the effects, honestly, of some of the inflationary metrics. So again, this is something we're going to be looking at very closely and monitoring. The good news, I have some relatively recent data. The CPI certainly component has been trending back in the right direction. Over the course of the last number of months, it's gone from 6 to 5 to 4. Now it's a little bit below 3. So hopefully that trend will continue. We'll move back to a low inflationary environment, and this will help us as we craft the 25 budget. But other things just to keep in mind, you know, the suppliers in our industry, there's not a ton of them, and they certainly have to make their ends meet as well. So, you know, inflation typically affects very quickly in terms of the cost of parts to keep the rail cars and locomotives running, facilities, so forth. And then things like steel. I know Rich talks about it all the time. The cost of steel has gone up, and again, this is sort of a global macroeconomic issue that's beyond the control of VRE or even any domestic supplier. So again, things that we will monitor as we go forward. And with that, I will hand you back to Mark.
Yeah, I would like to reiterate one of the comments that he made, which is that I think we really were in a very sort of stable equilibrium prior to the pandemic in that sort of mid to late 2010s, where inflation was low, and that we were able to make relatively modest increases to the jurisdictional contribution, relatively modest increases to the passenger fares, relatively modest increases to our expenses. That was a nice equilibrium to be in, and we may not be back. We may be in a better place than we have been the last couple of years, but we may never get back to exactly where we were before. Okay, so to talk about the jurisdictional contribution, which I know is of great interest to all of you. We had the FY21 budget, which was approved prior to the beginning of the pandemic, had the jurisdictional total contribution at about 18.3 million. That 21% number that's up there is really just to give you some context on how that compares to the overall budget. Again, at the direction of the board, after a lot of discussion, we decided to reduce the contribution in 22 all the way down to 4.8 million. We're able to fill that with the pandemic money. And then we've been on a process of essentially trying to get back up to sort of where we were before. We were at 13.5 in 23. And then for the year that we're in right now, we're at 16 million. I think as we continue, as ridership hopefully continues to recover, I think the two things just always to keep in mind, one is that it's a two-step process. So we will determine sort of how big the pie is that we're going to be requesting from the jurisdictions. And then that ridership survey that we do in October will determine exactly how big the pie, or I'm sorry, exactly how the pie gets divvied up between the jurisdictions. And the other, and again, this is that question of really how do we balance the budget? Every dollar that we don't get from the passengers or that we don't get from the jurisdictions or the state, that's another dollar, at least in this next couple of years, that we'll be drawing off of the pandemic money that we do have. And we'll talk at the end about that as well. So again, here's the historical data. We had a period in mid 2010s where subsidy was flat. Then we had years where we were sort of just regularly increasing it at relatively modest numbers, peaking then at that 18.3 million, dropping down because of the pandemic. Those of you who have been here for a couple of budget cycles will recall that we as staff have come back in the preliminary budget each time, recommending that we go back to the 18.3 million. There's nothing magical about the 18.3 number. That's just sort of that's where we were historically prior to the pandemic. And that recommendation has been us coming back and saying, let's try to get back onto that path. But that number, there is no magic associated with that number in terms of anything that's in the master agreement or any requirement to cover a particular portion of the budget out of the jurisdictional contribution. Just like Alex did with the fares, I think it's relevant to say, had we continued raising the jurisdictional contribution to keep up with inflation, to keep the purchasing power of that jurisdictional contribution, where we had been at 18.3 million in fiscal 21, if we were to adopt a jurisdictional contribution this coming year that had that same purchasing power, it would be a little bit over 22 million. So just if you're, and again, this is not a staff recommendation that we come in at 22 million. I just want you to have that number in mind to sort of say, that's where we would be to be sort of keeping level with where we were prior to the pandemic. Ridership, you guys got a really great discussion, I think. last month.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just on the subsidy, just to make one just point of clarification. Maybe everyone has this or knows this, but the 18.3 is the total.
Right.
And then within that, each jurisdiction's portion will be driven by the ridership survey that's conducted in the fall, consistent with the master agreement.
That is correct.
If theoretically we went to 18.3, you still could see more or less depending on the outcome of the ridership survey.
That is right. And just as a reminder, we did see some shifts from the pre-pandemic allocation to now, because we've had a stronger recovery of the ridership from those more distant jurisdictions like Spotsy and Stafford.
Ms. Bailey.
Is it time for questions or you want me to wait? I can wait.
Yeah, I think he's almost done. I shouldn't have interrupted him, but I did. Go ahead, Mark. Okay. Yeah, sorry. As I say, not as I do.
Okay, that's
We've had some really good discussions about ridership. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here. Again, I like the crystal ball graphic there. The crystal ball is still pretty cloudy in terms of trying to have any sort of near to medium term projection of where we're going. I think, all that we can do is make that schedule as attractive as possible, make that service as high quality as possible and reliable as possible. Have Chet and his team out there advertising, trying to get new riders to understand who we are and where we go, try to price it in a way that's attractive. And things like the return to work for the federal agencies, we'll just have to see where that lands. This is a chart that Chris and his team put together that I think is one of the best demonstrations of what's happening sort of underlying. There was a long-standing trend prior to the pandemic of sort of slow but steady growth in telework. And so this is the survey of our VRE riders. And if you look at 2012, on average, they were about 0.3 days of telework per week across the whole body of our riders. And by just prior to the pandemic, 2019, that had doubled to 0.6 days per week. I think that sort of, we saw that, I think, in sort of the slow, a little bit stagnant growth of our ridership over that period. That's due in part to capacity constraints on the train, but also due to a slow sort of, people not quite working as much in the office as they were before. And then with the pandemic, you had maybe 10 or 20 years worth of slow and steady pandemic or changes in telework jammed into, 1 year. And I think the numbers there are really striking, in particular, that red circle in the middle, where people, basically nobody was getting 3 or 4 days of telework previously. And now that's extremely common. Lots of people who maybe are only using VRE one or 2 days a week. So, again, you've seen a lot of this data in various charts and tables, just to sort of remind you of where we are on the ridership recovery, where we were in fiscal 2020, and that's sort of the 18,000, 19,000 rider range. And I think that is looking at the trend on the right, the blue graph, I occasionally get worried on a week to week or a month to month basis if I don't see it tick up. It's like, oh man, come on. But I think the underlying trend there is still quite strong. We're still seeing that continued growth. We just need it to continue. Thinking about where we are versus where we had projected to be, our original fiscal 23 budget was projecting 8,000 average riders per day. And if you look at June of 2023, we were hitting very close to 8,000 riders on Tuesdays and Wednesdays by the end of the year. But as far as an average across the entire week, we were definitely down closer to 6,000. So again, we're making that progress. We're just not making it as quickly as we had hoped. This hopefully should look familiar to you from the workshop last month. Again, a lot of uncertainty certainty in those sort of long-term, medium to long-term projections out to 2030, depending on telework, depending on what happens with jobs in the downtown core. So we'll see where we land. Talk about the money that we get from the Commonwealth, which is an important part of the budget. And just jumping to the last bullet point that I have up there, this does not include the track access fee reimbursements that we get through VPRA. This is talking more about what we get in terms of the operating assistance and the sort of regular capital grant matches that we used to get through the merit program. And then, as we've discussed a number of times, with the legislation that was just approved recently, VRE is now pulled out of the merit program and gets a dedicated up to 3.5% of the Commonwealth Mass Transportation Fund. DRPT actually made a presentation to the CTB earlier this week, last week, in a workshop talking about what they're projecting to use for the performance measures for VRE. That's why it says up to 3.5. It'll be incumbent on us to meet certain performance measures with respect to ridership, with respect to safety and reliability, things like that. We're pretty comfortable, we think, with what DRPT is proposing there. I think the big conceptual change that's going to happen in this budget versus previous year's budgets was that the operating and the capital assistance that were coming from the state were two distinct buckets. We would get a certain amount of operating assistance based on certain performance measures, and then we would apply for a certain amount of capital grant match. That dedicated 3.5% that we're going to get now is both. And so that's going to now be more of a policy decision where we as staff and you as the board are going to have to sort of make a decision. How do we want to allocate that money between the operating budget and the capital budget? We don't know quite exactly where we're going to land on that. That's something that we as staff are going to work on during the process and then come to you guys with some recommendations. And then just to close it out, and I think appropriately, because the pandemic relief is kind of, when we're doing all of our analytics on the budget, the pandemic relief money, at least right now, is kind of the number at the bottom. It's where it all falls out. And if we're not able to cover the cost of the service through either the fairs or the local jurisdictions or the state, then we're going to be drawing on those relief monies. And so again, I know we've talked about this a number of times, but just to remind you of where we stand, we have fully used all of the CARES money that we got that came in right at the beginning of the pandemic. We are partway through the rescue plan money. Although that was the money that we got last, because of restrictions on when it needs to be used, we moved that up to number 2 in the process. And then we'll have the 70 million from CRISA after the rescue plan money is used. And there have been some discussions at various points, like during the debt ceiling standoff, about funds that haven't been obligated potentially being clawed back. All of our relief money is obligated and in grants. So if you ever hear anything about that, I just didn't want you to worry about that. And so this is a rough projection again of where we are and how the money is potentially going to be used. We used up the last of CARES in fiscal 23. We're just about done with the draw 23 from the rescue plan. So then a few years into the future of drawing down the rescue plan, and then out more in sort of 28 and 29 is when we would begin to anticipate drawing on this. But that does not include any additional service. This is really running the existing service, and it does assume continued growth in jurisdictional contribution, continued growth in ridership. So if some of those things don't come in as we're hoping, then we would draw more. Of course, the converse is also true. If we're able to get more ridership back, things like that, then we would draw less. I think that's, yeah. So Alex and I will be happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share a couple of thoughts, and then we can open it up. One, I think, and going back to our discussion during the retreat, the reality that we're in is we're on a long march to get back to our pre-pandemic ridership. That's just the reality of the situation. It's not going to happen this year, next year, or the year after. It is going to happen because of the growth in the region and the investments that are being made in transforming rail in Virginia. But it's going to be a slog to get there. And the question for us, I think, is what decisions can we make to accelerate that by a year or two? And getting back to those ridership numbers also get us back to not being fiscally reliant on the federal money that we have. And we've got to do that by FY29, FY30, as the chart showed. So I kind of look at these decisions in that context. Going back to, I think it was the third or fourth slide at with the service level opportunities, which I think maybe is actually the most important question here. I feel that we need to be running a Saturday train like yesterday. As soon as we possibly can, we need to be running a Saturday train because we need to know how much potential there is on Saturday service, because that's going to be key to our next 5 to 10 years of growth. Right now, we have the data from the surveys we've conducted. We all feel, based on Metro's experience and other commuter rail line experience, that there's real opportunity in Saturday service. We don't actually know until there's a train that people can purchase a ticket for and step onto. So for me, in the FY25 process, accelerating that as much as we can responsibly is I think the most important decision. On the fare issue, I really wrestle with this one. I think in our conversations last year, there was a recognition that we were probably going to need to do it, but as the presentation highlights, it's a double-edged sword. And we have seen that with our reduced fare programs and our free fare, that has had an impact on ridership. So clearly people do take into account how much it costs and what it costs. That said, if you look at Metro, I think their budget this year on average is a 5% fare increase. Those of us who run transit systems and bus systems in our jurisdictions are probably looking in similar ranges. So it would not be out of the norm for the region to be in that ballpark. On the subsidy issue, and obviously we had a robust conversation on that, a good conversation on it last year. I still think it's important to get back at least to the pre-pandemic $18.3 million total subsidy number, as the presentation pointed out. If we had been increasing that regularly or semi-regularly, as had been the board's practice, it would be over $22 million. I think it's the case that today the jurisdictional subsidy is the smallest percentage of VRE's overall budget, probably that it has been, maybe ever, but certainly in a very, very long time. So the jurisdictions are paying less today, and I think it's important that we continue to get back on track there. But those are my thoughts. Open it up for questions for Mark or thoughts. And as the original slide noted, this is the beginning of the conversation about the budget process. So we'll have more conversations in the fall moving toward our adoption in December. Ms. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just said you answered one of the questions, and I appreciate it, about the peer funding. We're done with that, and now we're in the ARPA funding stage. So my question to that is, and then I just did some subtraction, we should be around, in terms of the ARPA funding, around 72, 73 million if we allocate the 31.8, is that kind of where left over is what I'm saying?
Yeah, that seems about right.
Is it up there? Did I miss it?
No, this is, of the 117.5 that we have
Mhm.
total, this is sort of how we're projecting that it's gonna spend over the next year.
Okay,
It's kind of like a water
water flow.
flow, you get done with CARES and then you do the rest of the plan and then you do the.
So are we, my question, and even with Krista, are we within the timeframes? I know there's.
Yes.
Frames, okay, so we're secure there.
We're okay.
I just want to.
Given the rules as they stand right now, yes.
Okay, so that's been consistent. And then the other thing that I want to ask is the jurisdictional contributions. And it is, you know, I was kind of excited to see Potomac Shores up there, but that's. But will that affect also our contributions, the new facilities as we go? Will that have an impact also on what the requirements are? In a big sense, you know what I mean? Over.
Yes.
It may be a remedial question, but I'm just trying to get.
The number of stations that you have in your jurisdiction does not come directly into the allocation, but the number of riders who live in Prince William County and ride VRE does go into the allocation. So we would all hope that when Potomac Shores opens, that lots of new Prince William County riders would ride VRE. And so that would indirectly, yes, that would increase your share of the pie.
Okay. Yes, and I know it was a remedial question, but I just wanted to touch point. So the other thing with the materials that you mentioned, and I know coming out of COVID that that's been an opportunity, just getting materials, particularly the steel. So are we still, have you seen an acceleration in terms of that as we plan for the future? Is it still kind of hard to get the materials?
Maybe I'll let Rich answer this one. My sense is that the supply chains for most of the normal things have gotten back to normal, but we do order a lot of specialty things, and it's sometimes those can be messed up. Rich, I don't know.
I think the best way to answer that is initially, the lead times changed so fast that we just nobody was able to keep up with managing those lead times. I think over time now, I wouldn't say steel is difficult to get, but we all recognize that the lead time to order those components, in other words, from an MRP, if you're familiar with inventory control and stuff, but from an MRP standpoint, we just have to know sooner when you need something. It's pre-COVID. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
We've learned to manage it in this new environment. I will say, and then what's the cost?
That's where I was leading.
Unbelievably
High. Okay. Okay.
And
So that hasn't changed.
that hasn't changed. And maybe just the point of emphasis there is we're not just talking, steel beams for, the Quantico Station Improvement Project, steel beams that go up there. I mean, we have parts for locomotives and rail cars that have steel content and stuff like that too. And that's just, we've seen piece part increases of 25-30% above what we were paying just 2 years ago. So.
And just appreciate, lastly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just appreciate your projections for the HR component as well as we go forward, because that can change as it relates to teleworking. Well, or will it, in terms of, do you need the personnel in-house, or is mostly everything going to be in-house, or are you projecting for that?
Again, that was the point of the slide. And this is something we've always done is we do this analysis of whether that position is best suited as a full-time employee, or, we get that type of service from a either a consultant or a contracted service. And when we come back in the fall, if we're going to recommend any additional full-time equivalent positions, we'll share with you what that analysis was. So.
Yeah, and I understand that. I guess I was just asking that in terms of not just the need, but, people, how we're doing business in terms of the cost of that. The projection for this, will that person be in-house, or that's what I was.
I get you. And wages.
Yes.
Market wages.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kelly?
Mr. Chairman, first off, I agree with the chairman's comments that, we're in a position where we got to pivot and change a little bit of our direction. We talked about Lou taking 10 years, so we're looking at least 5, if not more years out to make all this work. So we can't talk about the budget as one budget. We've got to look at the budget farther out. I do think weekend service we need to get on as quickly as we can. I think that was a potential game changer and seeing what directions we can go in. But it ultimately comes down to a question of how do we get the revenues to do it. So I've got actually more questions than I do with regards to comments. And I think I've got 3 right off the top of my head. On when the budget comes to us in September, staff is already going to have partially scrubbed it, correct? On after going and reviewing what departments are requesting. I do this with our budget. I understand to go through that process, but I like to see what we're not getting. I want to understand everything. So if there's any way when you present the budget, say, here's our budget, here's what the departments asked for, we're not funding these positions. I want to understand what we're giving out as opposed to just what we're getting. 2, I'd like to see a diagram of the direction of the gas tax revenues and the projections on the gas tax revenues. I think we all realize they aren't going on an upward trend. They're going probably on a relatively downward trend. And, that's an issue for all of us. I know some jurisdictions are already into general funds to do things. Some of us are not in that position. And I know that there are boards here that are going to get very uptight when we start reaching that. And that's a conversation we should have now rather than later. We would need to have the information on that. On the state funding, you had an asterisk on capital. Does that money, when we talk about capital funding, capital matches and stuff, that doesn't include C-Rock, or does that include C-Rock? That's separate. Okay. I didn't know if you had an asterisk. I didn't know. So okay, that's good. Mike, I don't know if you can, you look at some of the numbers are up, down, sideways. Is there anything we should be looking at projection wise and what the state's going to be doing on the transit side of things for funding? Is there any idea we can get on more of a long trend view of what to expect?
Well, I can tell you from the VRE standpoint, I know it's DFD standpoint too, where you continue with 84% coverage.
Okay.
Track access fees, which is about $17, $18 million in that ballpark. So our costs do go up too, and that's the agreement we have. On the DRPT side of things, I think, was it 5 million?
That was the original projection. It's closer to 6.5 million for this year.
I can talk to our friends at DRPT. I have not heard of any projected changes with regard to that. I believe that trend will continue.
Okay, can we have something at some point looking at what that actually translates into over time?
Yes, yeah.
And I think one of the things that I really appreciate you all doing on this one is putting the inflation factors into it, because that's something a lot of times we do not really look at. And we need to be spending more time looking at it. But I would like to get, before we get into jurisdictional subsidies or increases and or anything else like that, I'd like to have a little bit better handle on the funding sources. On the gas tax one, I think we all realize is going to be a potential issue. Again, looking beyond this coming budget down the road, we need to get a better look at that. And if we can, anything from DRPT or what the projections are, what that translates into funding for us, so we can kind of better plan on what to expect.
And I should note, it should go without saying that I cannot predict what will happen in November or what will happen with General Assembly next year. So,
and that's frankly,
a lot of General
we
Assembly
can.
is turning over for those who have. We're all asking questions, we're all following closely, but not the whole General Assembly, but more so than usual. This turnover is much more significant. So it is hard to predict what will happen there. Happy to continue conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I am sorry that I missed the retreat. I had a previous engagement and I had to be there. And it sounds like there was some really good discussion at that. And I think that weekend service or Saturday service is probably something that we do need
to start doing as quickly as we can to find out if that is a viable option to bring more ridership in. I would, of course, want us to be charging for that and not do free fares or this pilot project. I mean, we have to start getting, I wasn't in favor of the Fare Free Friday because I'm very much, I'm going to be interested to see the data because I want to see how much of those people actually convert to real riders. My inclination is we gave them a gift for the summer, which is fine, but I don't know that it's going to really turn into anything real, but that's okay. But my point I just wanted to make, and I won't belabor it, is I really do feel like even though increasing fares may be a double-edged sword, we're at a point that has to happen. It has to happen. And I think that if we continue to stay flat on fares, typically I see when people see not an increase, it devalues your service. And I think we absolutely need to have a fare increase. What that is, I don't know. But we absolutely do. And we have 68% of riders are government. So is there a subsidy associated with 68% of those riders? Right. So basically they're getting a double benefit here. It's not right. So that's my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, others, just try to go to folks who haven't had a chance, Ms. Balke.
With the chair.
I'll get you next, Mr. Karantonis.
So I definitely agree with everything that's been said especially as it relates to moving our Saturday ridership as soon as possible. I think we're all very anxious to see what that is going to look like. Those of us that are in the southern part of the VRE, we know that our jurisdictional subsidies are going to go up. So as soon as we can know what those numbers are, the better for us as we can put that into our own budget process. And I just want to say, I think that, any information that you have, your staff has done a phenomenal job on really looking and studying and gathering really the data that we need to make educated decisions. And I think the last piece of that is really the Saturday rider or Sunday ridership, however we look at it. As Miss Bagley and I were talking at I think it was at the retreat, she said, well, I want to come down to South Stafford because there are things down there I want to do. While people always think, oh, we're all going to go north, people that live up north want to come do things down in our area. So I think I'm very anxious to see if there will be fruits of our labor there. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Was it Mr. Karantonis?
Yes, maybe. Thank you for the presentation, and I align quite a lot with the way of thinking of with you, Mr. Chair, especially on service levels. One question that I have is, I definitely see that we are already thinking past the form or the premise of the system to being only a commuter system that is more of a connector, and that drives the idea of having having this weekend service. And I see a lot of opportunity there. The question is staff thinking of producing some sort of scenario that we can look in parallel? So what would it be with the Saturday service? What would it be even with Saturday and Sunday service? So that VRE is basically running 7 days a week. Is that would this be an idea, or would this be a proposal that will just produce what is in staff's research or study the most viable one?
Yeah, I think that the slide does say weekend, 1 day, or both days.
Yeah.
I think we had assumed if we were going to do one, it would be Saturday, but that's a good question. Are we confident that Saturday is much better than Sunday and we should do one versus the other? And in this year's budget process, what information will we have to make that decision?
So I'll just say this comes back primarily from the discussion at the retreat in that understand that, currently with Transforming Rail in Virginia, we do have in our agreements that we could come out with with a weekend service and late night service, some additional trains, 2026. And
In calendar year 2020.
in calendar year 2026, but that assumes that there's some planned additional infrastructure improvements that have been done. But that said, but what we heard at the retreat too is that there may be some interest, and I'll just use dip our toe in the water a little bit. So maybe we don't go completely at the weekend service, the Saturday or Sunday service. Maybe we do one day or the other. Initially, we think the Saturday service may be more attractive than the Sunday service. Not saying that Sunday would be bad, but if we're going to dip our toe in the water, maybe Saturday is the day that we dip our toe in the water. And, and potentially with the opportunity to maybe do that sooner than calendar year 2026. So that's what we heard. And so that's sort of where we want to, with an affirmative nod from the operations board, spend our time there, if you will, to be able to bring something back to you with some form of, ridership analysis. The other piece, I'll just say that the other thing we heard clear as well is the fare structure for that, because we talked about the fare penalty, and particularly being, predominant on the weekend, because we don't want to penalize a family getting on VRE, penalize them such that they'll just get right back in their car because, their vehicle and tolls and parking would be cheaper than 4 people getting on a VRE train. So we heard all of that. It's actually what we would like to continue to pursue.
Mr. Stork?
I think it's been a great discussion. I think my focus would be particularly on the ridership, whether or not, how do we get the data? How do we get the information to help us? Obviously, you all will be driving that process with the analysis that you do for Saturday service or Sunday service, whatever that weekend service is. For me, I want to get at least a sense of, we're not the first rail organization to make these kinds of assessments, and what else is out there. I mean, even if it's an order of magnitude, here's kind of what they did, here's kind of how they approached it. That's what I need to know now. I need to understand that better now. And obviously we've done some surveying of interest and whatever, bringing those pieces together is helpful. But I think I'm looking at more of the decision process that should be part of this. How do we assess the different opportunities and costs, et cetera? And there'll be some kind of decision process that others have done, and at least to get that to us early so we can be thinking about it. And also the background information is being prepared, whether it's by our staff or through the state support or other. Obviously, we have experts everywhere, and we just need to have them guide us in this process.
Thank you. Chair Walkinshaw?
Yep, I'll get you next, Ms. Bagley. Sorry, I didn't skip you. I apologize. Ms. Gary?
Very much. I just wanted to comment really quick. It sounds like everyone's talking about Saturday, so I assume that's probably where we need to start with that, and I agree with that. So I just wanted to comment really quick on the fare increases. I do think that not just for the sake of not putting the burden on taxpayers generally, because I do think we should go back to the alternating sooner than later, but also we have a very good service. And I think that what the word devalued was used. That's a good point. There's a sweet spot for our fares. I don't think we're at it. I think when we get there, we'll also see that ridership increase because people say this is something of value and I experience it and willing to pay for it. And they expect that when you pay a certain amount. We just have to find what that is. I do think we should have an increase. So I just wanted to share that.
Hey, Ms. Bagley.
Yes, thank you. Sort of along those lines, a data point I think I'd find useful and interesting, and maybe it's generally been provided in the past, as we talk about fare increases, is the staff able to share with us sort of purchasing patterns and history? Because my understanding is, back when the average federal, government employee was heading in 5 days a week, they just used transit benefits, bought a monthly pass, or, bought in large bulk 10-day passes. And I'm curious if our purchasing patterns are changing in a way that we're selling fewer monthly or more daily, and how that might inform our fare structure as we rethink it. And as we start to think about the non-commuter rider. I appreciate Ms. Hayes's comment about a lot of our riders, this isn't dollars coming out of their pocket, it's coming out of their employers. And so I'm hoping as we think about future fare structures, we're able to weigh essentially, those that are buying, monthly or large bulk passes and likely getting benefits for that, versus those that are buying, a family pack for a Saturday, or, buying a one-off pass because today they have a meeting in the city. So any information on that, sort of purchasing patterns versus just straight ridership patterns, I think might be useful.
Okay, Ms. Bomke?
Okay, I have, kind of a loaded question, Rich, with a smile on my face. Okay, so I heard you say, I think, that we would be moving the Saturday ridership up from 26 to 25, hopefully, right?
As a concept, I'm not
As
saying
a
we can,
concept,
but
right.
what I heard was.
We'd like.
We'd
We'd
like
like
it.
to see
That's
that,
what I heard
okay.
was,
So
like,
my
we'd like
question
to.
would be, how can we as a board help you move that up? Could it be moved up any sooner? And what actions would you need from the board, if any, to help you make that happen?
That is a loaded
That
question.
is a.
Let me just say this.
Because we don't understand your lens.
Right.
Let me just say that, again, from what we heard before, there is we've already formulated some thoughts, and again, to pursue this, I'm not saying specifically it would happen, but there's some conversations that need to be had with host railroads, VRE, folks like that, and we're gonna pursue that. And so at this point, let me go do that. Because it doesn't sound like, unless everybody around the table would say absolutely not, don't go do that. That's not what I'm hearing. So let's go do that, and I'll make contact with our partners at all different levels, and my goal would be to come back and bring you something in the at our September meeting, and I might be better suited to answer that question. What can you do to help us when I get to that point?
Sure.
Is that,
Sure.
if that's
That's
fair?
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And any kind of update that you can give us, very much appreciated. So we understand your perspective and your dilemma and the challenges that you have. So we understand what's going
I'm
on.
operating off of the basic premise that my dad taught me years ago. The answer is always going to be no unless you go ask.
That's why
Go ask. That's what I'm doing.
Okay, we'll go McLaughlin, Mensing, Bailey.
One quick note, yes, the expected weekend service would be 2026, but late 2026, because the projects are trending. We have to finish the Alexandria 4-track project near Miss Bagley, the Franconia 3rd-track project near Mr. Dorff, the Leland siding project. Once those are done, we get late weekend service. So you're looking at FY 27. And these projects are also relying on what Dallas is doing at King Street and
But that's for the full weekend service.
Full Saturday, Sunday, late nights.
Oh, okay.
So my point is late 26. So you're talking about getting a head start, which is great feedback. So that's one point. Second point, this is great feedback for me to hear as we work with the freight railroads as is often as bridge staff. So this is very, very helpful for us. And,
Yeah, and I think, you know, the ideal scenario would be if we can get that head start as early as possible, even if it's one concepts, one train. Because then we have information and data as we move toward that late 2026 timeline for the full weekend service. We have data just in terms of, does it work? But also what fare structure makes sense, right? So I think the part of the pitch to VPRA and others is that if we can get this in as early as possible with one train, at least one train, we can be more successful when we're ready. Okay, two, we can be more successful when the full-blown weekend service is ready to start.
I'm of the,
Three?
He's got
Okay.
3 fingers
Okay,
up over
three.
there.
the opinion from a transit planning standpoint, you need a few round trips to get capture the trip that's not taken. Meetings, the morning time might work for someone on the one round trip, but the afternoon, evening time isn't gonna work, so they're not gonna take it. So you
Yeah.
need that. But also keep in mind, whatever would happen in any transportation planning, you'd also want to intersplice it with Amtrak.
Right.
To have the VRE trains, one, not running Amtrak trains and vice versa, but to have that spacing. So that even if you do whatever we ask for, we only get a couple, that, oh, I could take VRE in, there's no VRE coming back late, maybe I could take an Amtrak, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Maybe Amtrak, maybe VRE can pick up that trip coming back out to Fredericksburg or someplace like that. That Amtrak might not fill. So it is complementary at times. And I know Amtrak doesn't hit all the stations, but it does help when you interplay Amtrak with VRE.
Okay. Mincing?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everyone's saying. I think it's important to start the weekend service soon. And I also agree with some sort of weekday fare increase. I think it's time. But I also wanted to hit that I think it is time to go back to our jurisdictional subsidies as they were before the pandemic. It's time to visit that as well.
Ms. Bailey?
Thank you, sir. My question was merely what Ms. Bumpkin said. I didn't know how to say it so eloquently, but I do agree with the Saturday initiative. And so thank you for asking the loaded question.
Okay, Mr. Smith?
I just need to say orally what my head nods have been over this last 5 minutes. I'm in agreement with thought processes. I think it's a very tangible indication that we recognize that post-pandemic recovery needs more than just watching the months and the clock tick. So often people in organizations, just wait for time and think everything's changed. So I think the activities we're talking about are very positive, and I'm full support of them.
Okay. Anything else before we move on to our next information item? So I think clearly there's a consensus around moving forward on an accelerated timetable for the Saturday service. And it sounds like, close to agreement around the need to do the fare increase this year. I think we had that agreement last year that this is the year that made sense, and more conversation about some of the other topics, and including the subsidy. And we'll look forward to seeing you again in the fall. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next information item, we have just the spending authority report. Anything there, Rich?
Just if you've had a chance to review it, if you have any questions, I do want to point out that Kristen and her team were very busy on June 29th. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 that were executed on June 29th. So anyway, any questions, I'll answer them. But that's the end of the information items, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Stork?
Rich, can you explain how you get multiple task orders that obviously run under $200,000? How does that become larger than that, or how does it get broken down? I don't recall. I know we've given permission for you all to make that decision, but I don't know the basis on when something is a task order that falls within the $200,000 limit and when it's not. How do those 4 things get pieced together? In other words, to make them individual task orders under 200,000 versus a larger cost that should have come to the board.
Oh, so specifically
I was using that because I don't understand how that was separated, and I wanted to make sure that I did.
So task orders, of course, we have multiple task order contracts, or multiple task order provisions under multiple contracts, if that's a better way of saying that. So for example, here at Keolis. So there was multiple task orders issued to Keolis, but they're very topic specific, okay? And so, and again, just using these examples here, there's the last bullet point there, it's on the Keolis is part of their facility maintenance for both of our maintenance and storage facilities. They have a program or a plan for the fiscal year to replace ties as part of their maintenance. So as part of the budget process, they come and they say, and they have a methodology. They have a maintenance plan, say, we need to replace X amount of ties during this fiscal year. So we go ahead and through the task order process, we'll issue them a task order to do that throughout the fiscal year. So part of the answer to your question is it's task specific, and the dollar amount ends up being whatever the dollar amount is at the end of the day. But if there's a task order that rises, the dollar amount rises above $200,000, then I bring that to the operations board for your approval, simply because you've only delegated up to $200,000 to me.
So for example, the two bullets that are up there, one says complete repairs on as-needed basis to the track at Crossroads and Mount Run. And one below that says complete project to replace ties. Those sound obviously very similar. They're similar kinds of work, but they're different because they are.
So again, what Keolis has identified, and of course, working with our team and stuff, very specifically, there are X amount of ties that need to be replaced for the fiscal year. So that has to be done. As opposed to the one above, Keolis will do routine track inspections, okay? And so in the event as they're doing those routine track inspections, say on switches, rail, there's all other components of those rail tracks out there. What that task order does for them is that when they come across that, a potential defect, or what we like to refer to as a near defect or a near condition, that we've already got a mechanism in place. They're tasked with inspecting it, but the level of repairs vary, right? So what we want to do via the task order process is that there's no hesitation, if you will, to go affect that repair. We don't have to put in a contract mechanism or anything. So they're allocated, and again, that number there comes off of quite a bit off of history, if you will. It goes back over the course of several years on what could happen in terms of repairs from inspection activity and stuff. So that's the distinction. If we, for example, at our maintenance and storage facilities, if we had specific elements, specific lengths of track or specific switches to replace, we would do that as a separate task order because that's a number. This one here is just having some latitude to be able to do things on an as-needed basis, to have things, it's from an efficiency standpoint, get things done well. So again, those are just some comparisons there. And then let's see, going up, let's see the.
Rich, I think one of the key things, the money that we're spending here is budgeted. I mean,
Yes.
it's funds set up aside for, this is not additional spending or coming outside the box.
All parts of it.
Yes.
So why these are all piling up, maybe that's a good point. It's because we transitioned into a new fiscal year. That's why these are all bundled up. These were all in preparation for the new fiscal year starting July 1st. If that happens.
These will basically be drawn down on, if you will, for the course of the fiscal year.
Exactly. And another point, the 177,581, that's an estimate. I mean, it's essentially whatever resources were expended, that's what they'll charge us. It's not necessarily that we'll spend that amount. As opposed to the 115,500, that's more, that's a program laid out. That's likely what we'll spend on that.
Okay, any other questions on the spending authority report? That brings us to operation board members' time, and maybe we'll change it up and start on this side. Ms. Gary?
I don't have much to say. You're all enjoying your summer.
Well, I wanted to speak to the Lou because that was amazing. Truly a facility that just kind of blew my mind. And, I hope that, I told my fellow board members about it and said, you guys have to go over there and check that out. It's what can be done there is just, incredible. So we're so proud to have it in Spotsy. And, I want to thank you for putting on the whole program there. It was fantastic. So thank you for that. And again, I apologize for missing the retreat. And hope everyone's having a good summer and getting ready for the fall.
Pass.
Wanted to say thank you for coming out, Chair Walkinshaw and Mr. Dalton for coming out to the groundbreaking at the parking garage. It was a hot but very nice event.
The Lou was wonderful. It was a great event. My apologies for the retreat, same for me. And I wanted to say to my CEO evaluation board members, that's you, Dan. And I'll get with Supervisor Lawson as well. We'll be having a Zoom on the 26th.
It's me too.
Is that you too? Wonderful, Mr. Chair.
Great.
I just want to thank her for using the word fall during this heat wave. I pass on the last.
I defer.
Ms. Bagley?
No, just sharing my kudos for the Lou event. The barbecue was worth whatever stains they may have caused. It was delicious.
And Mr. Karantonis?
I want to thank staff here and for their amazing work during the incident, the tunnel incident. It was. I received actually emails and communications from constituents that thank for the information, etc. We got some worried questions about when the service will be back on, etc. So the coordination with OmniRide also seemed to work fairly well under trying circumstances. So thank you for that. And so I wish everybody a nice and uneventful summer, and good work on the budget here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just say, I didn't mention in my remarks, but the Manassas Park groundbreaking was really exciting. And part of what excited me was to see what the city of Manassas Park is doing in terms of development and transit-oriented development in that entire area. So I think that's something that I won't put a timeline on it, but when it all comes together, it's going to be great for the city, but for our purposes, really great for VRE. So that's something to look forward to. If there's nothing else to come before the board, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chair, I will stay on the virtual.
Legislative committee will be
On the
right
legislative.
here in 2 minutes. So if you're not participating in that, and take your conversations outside. I think we're ready to get started.
Are you there?
Mr. Carantonis, can you hear
I'm
us?
here.
Okay,
Yep, sure.
okay. I think the first order of business for the legislative committee that hoping to accomplish is for the committee to select a chair, someone other than me. And Mr. Carantonis, since you're not here, there's already been some conversation around the table that maybe you might be the right person. Would you be willing to chair the legislative committee this year?
I would be honored. Thank you.
All right, thank
Do
you.
that.
If you like, I can go ahead and manage this meeting since I'm in the room with Joe and the team, and after this meeting, I'll turn it over to you.
That's convenient. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Joe, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So just real quickly, again, the way this normally works is we have a quick discussion here in July. You guys give me some ideas of what you're thinking, and then I put together a draft that we bring back in September. We have a committee meeting in September. You look at the draft, tell me if it's going in the right direction. We firm that up a little bit. We bring it as a info item in October for the full operations board. And then as an action item, it's a recommendation that the commissions pass our board. This is one of those things that the commissions have to pass. And then they would pass that. Normally they do it in December, which is the same time that they pass their own legislative agendas. So really quickly, just going over, sort of what we did last year. The most important thing at the state level, I think, was number one here. You have your legislative agenda from last year here, and it's the state operating support, advancing legislation that would remove us from the Commonwealth program that we had been in because we were basically competing with other bus organizations, and it was just really hard for them to figure out a good metric that covered both. So we were able to accomplish that. In fact, the DRPT and the administration took that on as one of their own bills. They thought that was a great idea as well. So they supported that, put those bills on, and we passed it. So as you heard a little bit in the budget discussion, starting for FY25, rather than having to go through this competition with other bus agencies, we will get, and as he said, up to 3.5% of the Commonwealth Transit Fund. And they are currently working on those metrics at the CTV level that would, indicate what we have to do in order to get the 3.5. So, so that was a pretty good win for us. On the federal side, we didn't have any specific asks on the federal side last year. We did, because they started having in-person meetings again, we did go up and we met with all of the relevant offices to us, had really good conversations. In particular, what we heard while we were up there were almost all of them had heard from other entities in support of getting funding for Union Station, and Union Station moves to this big redevelopment that we're doing. So we sort of went back around and talked to all of them and said, remember, whatever happens at Union Station, that's great and it's going to be good for us in the long run. But if we don't do the project at LaFont, and ultimately probably something at the tunnels, as we've seen lately as well. But in particular, we were talking about the LaFont project that adds the fourth track in the LaFont area that matches up to the 4 tracks at Long Bridge. If we don't have the funding to do that, you sort of built 2 really big things: the Long Bridge here and this redevelopment at Union Station, but you still have a bottleneck somewhere in the middle. So we continue to say, look, Union Station's great in the future, but the next big thing that needs to happen is our LaFont Station project and the 4th track station in there. And they all understood where we were going with that, and we're very supportive of that. And we will continue with that message up there. So those were the 2 things I wanted to point out from last year's agenda. And then I have my 2 government relations consultants here with me, Amy from the state level, Hockey from the federal level. And I'm going to let them just sort of give you an overview of what we think the environment is going to look like in 2023. So before we get going.
Yeah, quick comment. Aki's not gonna like it, but I'm gonna praise him. For those who don't know Aki, I worked with him for about 10 years. I did work in Capitol Hill as well, but I think before he was there. When I was in a different job in Chicago and then here, he was very helpful. He worked in Capitol Hill, so I think you guys got a good one and having him work for you. And I think we all know Amy. She won't like it either that I praise her, but we always praise her. She's been with VRE for a few years, but she's very helpful in Richmond. And I hear that not just to me, but I hear it from many other people. So you got a couple good ones here. So sorry, I teed you up the best I could.
Well, thank you.
So let's kick it
I'll go first? Okay, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Amy Perrin-Seibert. I'm the VRE consultant in Richmond with the Commonwealth Strategy Group is the name of my firm in Richmond. There's 6 of us there. And I've been working with VRE since 2013. So this is like my 10-year anniversary of being with VRE. So thanks for having me here today. Give me a little pen.
Yeah.
I know. A 10-year pen. Do you have those?
We do.
Oh, it's amazing. That's pretty exciting. Watch. Just
You make that 10 year.
I'll take a pen. I'll take a pen. But obviously Virginia is having sort of a very unprecedented year, as we all know, with all of our new elections, which already started with our primaries. We've had quite a bit of turnover already, and we're just looking at an unbelievable amount of turnover, to be honest. So I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you what's going to happen. I don't know, but I do know that we are certainly going to have a lot of new people who are going to need a lot of education about VRE and transportation in general in Northern Virginia. So, in total, we're going to have in our districts, we've got 12 delegates who sort of serve all of the VRE lines. Like if you want to think about, we went through and saw all the new districts. There's 12 of them. 5 of those 12 will be brand new. 1 will be an old returning delegate. So Delegate Orrock, who's down in sort of the Spotsylvania Stafford area, has gained a station with his new district. So while he's returning, and he's been there for a really long time, he's sort of new to the VRE, VRE stations. In the Senate, we have 7 senators that serve our area, and 2 of those will be new. And one of the seats that's actually going to be the newest, which is it's 27, which is sort of the Stafford area. That's where Tara Durant and Joel Griffin are running against each other. They have a lot of stations in that district. So that's going to be a brand new person with a lot of VRE stations because it's sort of Spotsylvania Stafford area right there. So they've got a bunch of stations. And I think the biggest thing and the most important thing is that overall, in Virginia, like at the lowest point, we'll have 48 new people in the House and the Senate. At the highest point, we could have up to 55 new people. So those numbers are those are crazy big. We've never had anything over about in the 20s. Like what I heard recently is this is the highest turnover we've ever seen since Reconstruction. So it's just good out there. I think the craziest part about it too is that, even though we've had turnover in the past, what we also have is a House and a Senate right now that are super close together, right? It's basically 22-18 right now, Democrat control in the Senate, and it's like 52-48 in the House, Republican control. Both those things could change. So the way the seats are, there's about 13 competitive seats in the House of Delegates right now. That could, it's really probably up to like 3 or 4 seats that could flip it either way. And then in the Senate, same thing. There's about 4 seats that are truly competitive. And the way that it stands right now, it could go either way. We could even end up with a Senate that's 2020. To be honest, there's some numbers that could happen where they come out like that. So I think in addition to having so many new people that need to be educated, we also could have party control could flip on either house, both houses, or one of the houses. And so that could be a really big change. So with that said, that's just sort of a very sort of volatile General Assembly session that we can see for VRE, for anybody else when we're kind of going in there. So, big asks will be a little hard. I would certainly say that's going to be difficult. I think the biggest changes we see are obviously on the money committees, both the House and the Senate. We're losing an unbelievable amount of institutional knowledge in both those places. Obviously, George Barker losing in the primary was really a big deal for Virginia and for Northern Virginia to be specific. I think that's going to be really hard. We're definitely going to see a shift of power out of Northern Virginia in the General Assembly, which will be tough for us. We've had a really good go, to be honest, for a lot of years here, where we had Nick Saslaw, we had Janet Howell, we had George Barker, we've had Eileen Phillip-Horn, who was the Speaker of the House, who was from Northern Virginia. So we had a lot of people that were very influential and had been there for a long time. And so those folks are retiring or aren't coming back. So it's going to be a big year of kind of rebuilding and educating. So Joe and I have talked a lot about that, about sort of how we're going to try to meet some of these new folks. We're already starting to try to do that now. Some of the folks that won their primaries that are in safe seats, I met Laura Jane Cohen, who's in the Burke area, and she already wants to come and meet and learn more about VRE. She's got 2 stations in her new district. So we're trying to set up a time in August where we can go talk with her about that. So she's on the school board, so transportation is not an issue she knows that much about, but wants to learn about it, which is great. So we're going to try to do that with the folks that are new the best we can before session starts. So we were kind of, again, on the front end. So that's kind of what we're doing. I think in Virginia, just trying to, I think, pay attention and meet as many people as we can so we can educate them about the good work that VRE does, how it's important it is to the economy and to just the community in general. So happy to answer any questions. That's
is Joe, I mean, is now the time to talk through the draft itself or this or last year's?
This is last year's, but
it's last year's.
Typically sort of base the next one. On what's here. But yeah, we want to just stick with the state stuff for now.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that jumps out at me, in terms of the new members, and I was impressed about how many GA members now represent a VRE station. Should we be systematic in inviting each of those members that represent a station to do a system tour? With the understanding that would be a lot on you. I don't suspect they're all going to do it, right? So what was the total? You said like 7 and 12, or
of new people or the total number period? Just everybody that so
representing the VRE.
12 total on the House and 7 in the Senate.
So what if we just sent an email to each of those 19, inviting them to do a system tour? Best case scenario, maybe a third of them will actually do it, right? And then consolidate dates and do 2 or 3 at a time. I mean, is that achievable, or is that?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And I think you're right. What often happens when we make those invitations is people say, well, I can't take the full day to do that, but do you want to come in for a couple hours and brief us? So we might have sort of a plan B with each one.
Yeah, I think that's fine. It seems to me there's value in reaching out and saying, hey, you represent a VRE station. You're part of the VRE team. We'd love to invite you to, come and do a system tour. And if they take us up on it, great. If not, we've broken the ice a little bit.
And that's kind of what we're thinking. We didn't think quite a station tour, but we're thinking about meetings. But I think a station tour is a good idea, and we can also figure out how to maybe consolidate and do offer a couple dates when people can say, would these dates work for you? A half day, a couple hours, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like the full blown tour all the way up to Union Station. I think there's like exponentially more value in getting them on a train with you than sitting in their office or in an office. Meeting. Mr. Carantonis?
I couldn't agree more. I have a question. So on the money committees, yes, we lose, known and predictable and, very, very, very institutionally friendly people. What on the transportation side? So Marston is still, or do we know who is more likely to succeed there, or who will be leading these committees? Not yet, right?
So not exactly. Only because there'll be a bunch of change. So
there will be change.
It'll change the list of the party. So for example, if the Democrats keep control of the Senate, Lucas from Tidewater will take over for Senate Finance as the chair. I think Dave Marsden will probably actually move from being Transportation Committee chair over to Commerce and Labor chair, because I think he'll take that over after Dick Saslaw left. I think everybody thought it was going to be Lionel Sproul, but when Lucas beat Lionel Sproul, that left an opening there. So we're probably going to see a shift over there. So the question would be sort of who takes transportation. It could be either Jennifer Boysko, who I think is between that and P&E for her level of seniority, or Scott Surville will be the next person that could take over transportation. So if you look down the list, the only way I can do that is if you go through seniority. Obviously things can still change because people might want this committee over that committee, and so you never know. And then obviously if it switches to Republican control, it'll be a totally different story, and we'll have to see, and that'll be a complete reshuffle of folks. So it's a little hard to say. This is why it's I think it's probably one of the most sort of up in the air years that we've ever had, just because we don't know. It would be different if we knew that there was just gonna be 48 new people, but we knew the parties were gonna stay in control, but we don't know that part either. So that's I think that's what's tricky about it, is that results in all new committee assignments. But lots of new people are gonna get committee assignments anyway. There's gonna be so much movement. Like in the Senate Finance Committee, I think we lost like 7 or 8 people off that committee, period. So like half the committee is gonna be brand new. So that means you got
Yeah,
half.
that's a completely new situation. I agree.
That's-
But
Yep.
transportation looks a little bit different. It's more within a more predictable pathways.
Yes,
Still,
a little bit. And yeah, we've got some really good advocates still up here in Northern Virginia, you know, like especially people who have districts. We've got Mark Sickles, who's gonna be in the House, who's been there for a long time. Luke Torian, still in there too. You know, we've got Elizabeth Bennett Parker, who served on VRE and is gonna be there, even though she's not like a longtime veteran, she's still gonna be considered a veteran at this point. And then, you know, we've got, Paul Mildy's running for office. He served on the VRE board when I started here. He was the president of the board. So, you know, we've got some people that have some real knowledge, which is helpful. And then on the Senate side, Scott Somerville, Dave Marsden, Adam Eben, like those folks are, again, have a lot of seniority and are still there in Northern Virginia and also have stations at VRE. So it's not dire. It's just very different, I think, is probably what is the issue. So a lot of work ahead of us, I think, is really, and, you know, and honestly, it'll be helpful for the VRE board members when they start talking and meeting some of these new folks to really kind of let them know that you sit on the VRE board, that you're a resource for them. I think that you know and are happy to answer questions, connect you with staff, et cetera. I think that'll be really useful too, because you guys are going to be out there and meeting new folks too. So the most that we can do as an operations board, I think, will be helpful for us moving forward as well. So appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Bunky.
So just tagging on to your comment about maybe doing a tour with these people or having them come in, have we thought about, and not just for this time, but something we can add on our website if it's not already there, what about a virtual tour?
We have not done that yet. We have discussed whether or not we have the technology to do that and whether or not our website can handle that. We are in the midst of updating our website, so there might be something that we discuss with the new, and John looked up real quick.
So something where, you know, you pretend like you're on the tour and then you get to Leland Station. Okay, these are, you know, the number of homes around here. Here's the people number that ride, or any improvements that we're doing at that station. And not just for these people, but for the general public.
Well, that's what we've really been looking at is there an opportunity to do a virtual, hey, this is how you ride VRE.
Exactly. Okay, well, you guys are already on that one. Okay, that was just a thought.
Just to know too, well, we had these in the past and we're gonna try to do these again too, which is we had these maps that kind of like identified all the districts and stuff like that too, with stations. And so we're gonna update these, which I think will be really helpful both for us and everybody here to know who the people are and what stations are in their districts.
Yeah.
But then also for the folks to know like, oh, these are the stations that are in your districts, and we'll hand those out and give those to folks too. So we're working with NBTC to do that. They actually did a bunch of this already for all the transit, and so we're going to have them break it out for VRE. So those will be really helpful too. Just to kind of, I think sometimes a visual is just very useful. At least it is for me. So I think it will be for other folks too. So we're working on that too.
So clearly, this first state operating support item will fall off.
Check that off the list.
Check that off the list. But I do want to make sure that everybody understands that with FY25, with the change in the way that we're going to get our state funding, the amount of service that we run will no longer affect the amount of state funding we get. It is purely based on a percentage of that pot. So what we want is the revenue sources that go into that pot to increase greatly so that the pie gets bigger and our 3.5% is bigger. So as we talk about adding service, things like a Saturday service, those types, I think the next thing might be, do we want to talk to the state about, look, you're our partners in this, and you want to see, you know, people get off 95 and 66 as much as we do, but adding this new service on the backs of just the jurisdictions paying for it is going to be tough. And you know, is there a possibility to see if the state would be willing to? There isn't a program right now that we can specifically go to and ask for, you know, a trial run of Saturday service or anything like that, but perhaps I know Amy is going, ooh, that's an uphill battle. That's-
Yeah.
Depending on who.
Like 2026.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, I'm realistic about the prognosis for something like that, but I think it's worth teeing up, right? And I do think, I mean, if you've driven north or south on 95 on a Saturday, you can see that there would be some value in 1,000 people getting out of their cars and getting on VRE for the
It's a value
Commonwealth.
to people in Richmond, it's a value to people in Hampton Roads,
Yeah.
anybody who drives.
Yeah. So I would say that's a good thought. The other thing that I was just thinking about with respect to this first item is Mark mentioned the ongoing conversation with DRPT about the performance measures that will be put in place. You know, it's probably not something we want the GA to delve into.
That's purely.
We do not.
Yeah. But obviously we gotta keep an eye on that and raise an issue if it's going in a direction that would be unfair or problematic. The only other kind of just, you know, I have a couple wordsmithing things on this that we can figure out later. On the MBTA funding, I think whatever the number is, we should put that in here.
So there's some question of whether there is still a gap, honestly. I think the gap
okay.
may have been kind of filled. I mean, not, just from pure,
Okay.
just time, to be honest.
Inflation?
Yeah, I think time, et cetera, has sort of done it. So it might be something that we.
Okay, we'll nail that down. If we gotta take it out, we gotta.
Continue, yeah, we might consider like phasing that out, to be honest, so.
Well, one way or the other, if let's use the amount. If it's zero, then we'll just take it out.
We didn't have an amount last year because they couldn't give us one, so we'll, but yeah. There wasn't one yet last year, so, yep. Okay.
Then there was one other issue. Steve and I had a quick conversation about this, and this is sort of really high level, and if it's not something we want to pursue, that's fine. But currently, the commissions have the ability to, I forget what the right word is here, but if we need a piece of land, the commissions can go in and try and buy that land for us. What we don't have, which I believe VPRA has and EDA and others, is quick take authority, which is a different way of going about doing that and would shorten the amount of time it would take for us to get the land and start the project. So as I said, we just sort of had this internal discussion of, is that something we'd be interested in pursuing? That's something we could do, or, you know, is that something we just looked at BPRA, you know, under certain circumstances to help us out with that?
Well, where we own land, we have helped with.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah.
as I know James, and you know that helped. We don't own land on the other one. Well, no, outside of it, change it. But we actually are going, we want to tweak our eminent domain. I'm not sure if we're still bubbling up through some people, so I don't want to get out in front of our secretariat. So it's one that you were, don't be surprised if you see some language, because we would like some quick take authority to be strengthened. We don't necessarily quick take, we have eminent domain powers, but I need my lawyer here to explain the nuances. But just in case there's a vehicle moving or something, just wanted to be aware.
Well, maybe, I mean, since it sounds like this is in the nascent stages of thought.
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you know, we have what you would call slow take power. You have to file a petition, you have to go through the process. You know, if there's a trial could take as much as a year. It could be an appeal, you'd be hung up in the appeals code for a year. So, I mean, if you needed to acquire a piece of property, say to expand a station, just say for parking, it could be a 2-year process. I mean, we started this at Broad Run. You may remember, we were going to condemn that property, but we couldn't acquire title to it until a court basically awarded it. VDOT has what's called quick take power, but it's for a limited range of things, you know, obviously for roads and for drainage projects, things of that nature. And that's been given to local governments as well, but it's still a narrow range. VPRA has something very interesting, which is similar to quick take in that when they want a piece of property, they can file a certificate of take, which is what they do in the quick take process, post money with the court, and they immediately acquire title, which means that they can then go build the project and then fight about value in the normal condemnation process. I'd be interested to know what you need to have tweaked, because that is exactly what would be good for us. We don't want like sort of VDOT quick take. We want to have what VPRA has, which is you file a certificate, post the money, and then you have title right then, and you can build the project. That way, it won't interfere with your process of building a project.
Can we today cite an instance where not having that authority has slowed or hindered or made more expensive our ability to do what we need to do? Is it more prospective?
Well, yeah, this is obviously a being proactive, because we may get in a situation when we need some property. I can tell you that the recent example with Broad Run is probably a good example of it, in that, with the data centers and then the demand for industrial property that was in Prince William, still there, was driving the market up more and more and more. So that's an example of why you want to be able to jump on a piece of property and take it right away, so that you don't run the risk of an inflating market.
Okay.
But no, I can't say we've really ever had that problem. Ironically, Broad One was acquired by Quick Take, because we didn't have that power. Prince William County did it for VRE.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, if we had a situation immediately, we could probably look to VPRA, which has that authority, or maybe one of the jurisdictions, but that's a clunky way to do things. I mean, it seems to me that there's not an immediate pressing need for this, and with the uncertainties in the General Assembly, maybe this is not the year for it. But I think it's definitely something we should have on our list as we go forward.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin?
Yeah, I think Mr. McIsaac should talk to our general counsel, Mr. Wesson. He can better explain nuances that we need to tweak.
Yeah.
And at any point, whether it be at either line, if we have authority, that we'll always, as long as I'm there, we'll always help VRE as we have in the past. But I think it'd be helpful if our language doesn't make it past the higher ups, to the legislators with their blessing, if VRE can support it.
Well, yeah, why don't we do this? I mean, Steve, you can have those conversations, and then Mr. Karantonis, as chair of the committee, will maybe put this on your plate to resolve. I think it maybe is the case that this is an issue that folks on the broader operations board might have different opinions and questions about, just philosophically. So we would need to have that conversation probably.
And not just that, just to make sure everybody realizes, we're not talking about for VRE here. We are talking about, it would ultimately be the commission. So we would have to do this in coordination with the commissions, have both commissions agree that this is.
And the other thing I would just suggest too is that maybe if there's a way, when you guys talk, if there's a way to sort of have the commissions be able to like either piggyback on their authority, or some way to like let them use the authority for the commissions. If there's another way to do it where it isn't like a straight out change, then maybe there's like a little tweak to that change. I would just consider, if they're gonna make some sort of a change, if that does make it through, if there's a way to kind of tweak it a little bit where they can do something on the behalf of the commissions, or when it's rail related and it's narrow, I think that might be something just to, if there's an easier way to do it than like another new flat out, just because I know that eminent domain issues can be very touchy. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a way to make it less touchy. And I think the narrow piece is important too. I would definitely say like making sure that it's as limited as possible is important.
So I kind of like the fact that we don't have a piece of land, because that's the first thing they're going to ask is, who is this going to be impacting first? And it's good that we don't have anything, but as a growing entity, I think that's really, really important. And as you say, why have a clunky way to go about this when we could have that ability? So whether it's this year or the next, I would definitely be in full support.
I'm also in support of that. I perfectly hear that, and I know that we can show examples of how problematic this may and extremely costly it may become. Now I understand that people need to be talked into that and slowly introduced. That I get. So this is not going to be an easy sell.
Right. Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with what Meg said, and Tech is, just for my clarity, is this what we did at Quantico also?
No,
No, it's something different.
no need for conversation, at Quantico now.
Okay. There was just
Okay, so we'll continue that work and that dialogue. I think it's a good issue to tee up, definitely. Anything else on the state side, Joe?
I don't think so, nothing specific. We will, put some of the evergreen issues that we keep on here, keeping an eye on FOIA changes, procurement changes, those sorts of things.
Okay.
Switch over to
Yes, yes.
Good morning. I'm Alka Maher Piersma with Cargo Infrastructure. We are a transit lobby firm. That's all we do. I just retired out of the federal government, 23 years in the House. I came off a T&I committee, Transportation Committee in the House. Quick overview of what's going on in DC. Where to start? It's a strange year. We're used to having a divided Congress, but the House is House majority is self-fighting a lot more than usual, and that's making things very strange in DC. For example, FY24 appropriations process is ongoing. In the Senate, they just released the bill yesterday. In fact, the transportation bill, strong funding there. Strong funding for the capital investment grant program, which is the main transit program for new projects, and strong funding for the formula program, which is really important for VRE. In the House, because of the debt ceiling bill, well, the debt ceiling bill itself is actually not problematic, but when it passed, many House conservatives were frustrated by it, and then revolted and have pushed House leadership to essentially ignore those debt ceiling caps and go 120 or so billion dollars below. This is for the whole discretionary program, but 120 billion below where the debt caps are, forcing the House bills to all be incredibly low, reduced funding, to the point where in the House transportation bill, the formula funding there is strong. It's great. It's good and important. But the CIG program, I think, has it's like a 60-70% cut. I mean, it's got barely any money at all. It leaves the infrastructure bill advanced money intact, which is important. But it provides almost no new money on top of that, which was not part of the original deal for IAJ, and it's setting up for a very rough fall and trying to negotiate these two bills together. It's clear, you can look at other legislation too. You can look at the National Defense Authorization Act, which happens every year, generally a bipartisan bill. Lots of fighting about it, but it generally always comes together. And the House bill this year, moving forward in a very bipartisan way, and when it came to the floor, everything blew up. Conservatives pushed a bunch of cultural issues onto that bill, pushing all that's away from the bill, and setting up again another process where the House is very, very far from the Senate. And it's created a dynamic where House leadership has been forced to the right so far that it's going to make any conversation between House and Senate very difficult to do. For purposes of VRE, it means on transportation funding, I don't anticipate an agreement anytime soon. I think we'll quickly get to the end of the fiscal year, and we might have some short-term continuing resolutions to fund the government. It's also possible we get a shutdown because I don't see how Republican leadership can actually negotiate with the Senate right now and not lose all the support from the conservatives. So it's going to be a rough fall. I think the one thing for VRE to worry about is a government shutdown, where it's hard for you, FTA will effectively shut down. It will be hard for you, you won't be able to do grant processing or anything like that. So that's the one thing I would think about going forward. That's the dynamic for this year. I think The good thing is your federal delegation is stable. Same members, same senators, they're all very supportive of VRE.
So I don't know that we have a specific ask again this year. We will continue to reach out to them, make sure everybody that I go up there and meet for the first time, I tell them, I always want to meet you first. I don't want to be the day that I come in asking for something to be the first day that we meet. So we're up there talking to as many staffers as we can, and as many of the members as we can. And we'll continue to do that. The only place that I would say that maybe we would want to think about reaching out and maybe not asking, but throwing some ideas out there is I know that this board does not want to advocate for bringing federal workers back. There are a lot of people who don't want to go back into the office, and you don't want to get on the wrong side of those people. But there was a recent article, and I know there's a lot of discussion about, so if people aren't coming back, federal workers aren't coming back, what's the Fed going to do with all this office space that they have? And a lot of it is really old, so they want to get out of it anyway. They want to get new stuff. So what would be advantageous for us, and I think advantageous for the region as a whole, is if it was more consolidated around the LaFont area. That way, they have access to VRE, they have access to Metro, and in the future, we're looking at access to MARC trains as well in the LaFont area. So at the very least, if there's going to be fewer federal employers going into the city, let's have them be where we are. So just sort of putting that out there to anybody who will listen to us, that we think that would be a great idea rather than building, a great new office building, 2 miles away from LaFont, and it's not very helpful.
Or in Alabama.
Or in Alabama.
Which is what they want to do. Yeah. I guess kind of my philosophy on it, and maybe this isn't right, has been, our job is to figure out how to serve the customers, rather than tell the customers what they should do. Now, the federal government hopefully views us as a partner in helping them accomplish their mission. So it's reasonable that there's a back and forth. So, maybe it does make sense for us to have some kind of language that talks about the importance of having predictability about the physical location of the federal workforce, right? And that we have in the region a transportation and transit network that was designed decades ago around the principle that federal workers would be, for the most part, in a few parts of Washington, D.C. And, we can't uproot the train tracks if that changes. Now, for some around the room, that cuts both ways, because some of us are trying to get federal facilities to move from the District of Columbia to Fairfax County, for example, coincidentally near a VRE line, right? So it's a little bit dicey, I think, to get into beyond federal employees should be located in areas that are accessible to transit, including VRE. So maybe it's the right time to have some language like that, given that there is this, conversation which comes up like every 5 or 10 years, right? That we should move federal employees to Iowa or Alabama or wherever. It's kind of a political hobby horse. But maybe it makes sense for us to come up with some language on that. I'm not sure how others feel. I have felt like, I think for anyone to be saying, federal workers should go back to the office if that's what it takes to complete the mission that they need to accomplish, right? The fact that it would make our lives easier or make life easier for the District of Columbia government. I don't think that's a strong argument. I can tell you, it's not a strong argument in Congress, right? Nobody cares about that argument. So I've been hesitant for us to make that particular argument, but.
But how about, I mean, I understand that. But how about saying, well, predictability doesn't necessarily mean that we want to prescribe or push anybody to make decisions. One, about the percentage of the workforce returning to the office or not. But for example, on how the different telework days are coordinated and spread across agencies, etc. All this stuff. This is something that we could say. So from the point of view of providing the infrastructure, a most efficient, most environmentally sound way to move people around, etc. Well, yes, predictability of location, service days, etc. would be actually saving public money as well as making everything work better.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And we added that language, I think last year, about the service days and the federal work week. And I was kind of banging this drum a lot last year. I do think it's reasonable for us in the region and transit agencies in the region to communicate to the federal government, especially rail systems, that a situation where every federal employee works remote every single Friday is highly problematic because it's very difficult to run an efficient system when you have that kind of spiky ridership and usership. And it does seem like even on the issue of more efficiently using the federal space, that if OPM had some guidelines to try to spread out, I recognize this won't be popular with federal employees maybe, but to kind of spread out the way in which people are working remote, it would allow us to be much more efficient and cost effective moving forward, because we can't just not run trains on Fridays. There are some people using it, but if it continues over the next 10 years, we're going to have situations where trains are packed and full on Wednesdays, or we can't even meet capacity on Wednesdays, and they're still empty-ish on Fridays. And that's not going to be sustainable for us or Metro in the suburbs. So I think that's very real and makes sense for us to try to talk about.
It also steers a little bit the discussion about keeping the destinations or the new.
We lost you. Hopefully you can hear us, but you cut out. We cannot hear you, Takis.
I was going to say something very important.
Well, I think, and I think it's consistent with what Takis is saying, and if he can hear me, he can get on and correct. But it sounds like, Joe, let's work on some language about predictability in terms of where the federal workforce is located, maybe without sounding too prescriptive. But yeah, talk about drastic changes in the physical location of the federal workforce obviously would be problematic and endanger our ability to continue to help the federal government to accomplish the missions they need to accomplish.
We could also work with the General Service Administration and ask them to place buildings where transit already is.
Yeah.
That would be the key right there. Yeah, we're really.
The FBI building, like, are you going to put it near transit, no matter where it is?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Okay. All right. Anything else on the federal side?
I don't think so. If somebody has any questions or additional comments.
No. Okay. Joe, maybe you can just circle up with Takis after the meeting, let him know where we landed. But if there's nothing else, I think we can adjourn. Is there anything else we need to cover?
Nope.
Okay.
We'll see a draft agenda, very drafty agenda, beginning of September. based on this conversation, and then we'll do this again in September, and we can sort of figure out what we really want to do next. The operations board.
Okay, great, thank you.
Everybody have a good weekend. Damn, now it's.
Marcus, I'm sorry, we lost.
It doesn't help.
We lost power in at my home, and now I'm on auxiliary here and auxiliary internet, of course. Sorry about the interruption.
That's all right. We just wrapped up, but we decided we're gonna incorporate your suggestions in terms of that language. So Joe will work with you on it and be in touch with you so you can pick up the ball from here.
I will touch base in any case because I want to learn a little bit about what we've done so far and what the issues are, and I need to dive a little bit deeper. I'm still a very rookie person here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
You too.